Hello, everyone. Today we are going to be talking about the CFL, which is on the minds of many people, being football fans. I've been a fan of the CFL for quite a long time, particularly a big supporter of its unique rules, which, in my view, makes the game exciting. I haven't watched the NFL for quite a long time because I find that the game has become dull and slow. So when the new commissioner of the CFL started to announce rule changes, quote unquote, on the presentation, that he needed to make the game more exciting, suggesting that the CFL was boring or the rules make it boring. And it came as a shock to many Canadians, particularly football fans, big CFL fans, that this is a completely outrageous statement. It's outrageous. We all have witnessed the dull, boring endings, particularly in the NFL, where the game just seems to be pretty much an anticlimax within the last 5 minutes of the game, particularly the last 2 minutes. We all see how we have, because of the 20-second clock and various other innovations in the CFL, like the clock doesn't start until the play is called. That sort of cuts down the opportunity that you have in the NFL, where the you know the team can just kneel on the ground and the clock just runs down. So we have a lot of innovations in our Canadian game, which do make it exciting. So many Canadians, you know, take it quite a shock that the commissioner believes that by shortening our field, by narrowing the field, by adopting all sorts of American rule changes, not even ruling out changing our game from 3 downs to 4 downs sometime in the future. This is going to make the next game exciting. This is completely outrageous. Many Canadians are upset. And, Nathan Rourke is a great Canadian quarterback, was equally and similarly outraged by this. So, I have certain opinions about this, which I'm seeking to share as a fan of Canadian football, and that comes with respect to Canadians originally in the election having an elbows up focused. We've been concerned about Trump's agenda about annexing Canada, the shocking agenda that he announced into his second term. Um, in my view, there's no coincidence between Trump's desire to annex Canada and these so called rule changes coming parallel to um, Trump's desire to um, annex Canada. And I think that there's an old sort of phrasing, an old statement that goes something like this: there's no such thing as coincidences. And I believe that the statement that there's no such thing as coincidences um, are meritorious in this particular situation. Um, in terms of the drive that Trump has had, the Trump agenda to annex Canada, it has been a belligerent strategy. We know that intertwined in American history, there has been efforts. The United States in general has been um, a product of annexation. So, and we all know that the United States is a tremendously um, is a tremendously rich society in terms of money. That has a well developed infrastructure in terms of covert operations. This has been well documented in Canadian history. So, in my view, what we are seeing happen in the CFL is that the drive to, Americanize our Canadian game. We all know that the Canadian game that the CFL and Canadian football is a national institution. Our rules are national institution. When I see the Canadian game, I see ourselves as a society, as a nation, being reflected our unique identity. So, in my view, what we are seeing here with the Americanization agenda of the CFL is what they call a psyops, a psychological operation. The we have to, as Canadians, be vigilant at this time that the drive to annex Canada. We cannot see this as simply as being limited to a trade war. We ought to not see it as being limited to what we see happening with respect to the negotiation between Mark Carney and Donald Trump, as we see on the mass media. We have to regard the belligerent pursuit of annexation by the Trump agenda as being likely to be part of a multifaceted strategy that not only involves what Trump's stated agenda is to take over Canada by force, but also a strategy of mass psychological operations whereby various interests which are part of the Trump agenda are pursuing efforts to quote unquote negotiate or infiltrate the venerated Canadian institutions, to make them more like the American institutions, and to obliterate the distinctions between Canada and the United States, to enable and foster an environment whereby, because of our identity has been destroyed in some time in the future as a result of these types of operations, that Canadians will be less resistant to what Donald Trump described as a quote unquote merger between Canada and the United States. So it is my humble opinion that the drive to assimilate CFL is, the drive by the Board of Governors as commissioner to Americanize Canadian rules is not to make the game more exciting, is to conform by, in my view, a desire to placate uh, to the a sort of a covert operational context to assimilate Canada, to obliterate the distinctions between our institutions. This is, indeed will be a strategy of Donald Trump as he seeks to renegotiate trade. He will want to, um, dismantle the dairy industry in Canada and do everything he can to make it Canada more sort of conquerable, in his view, to obliterate all that we are, make ourselves as Canadian. He will perceive this as a threat, as a so-called trade threat, or however he wants to characterize it, and he will be demanding the, as much as possible, control of Canadian resources, so-called precious minerals. And in my view, Canadians need to regard what's going on in the CFL as being simply an extension of the Trump agenda by willing and complicit operators of this agenda. It's quite shocking, not only in my view, that the that these that the commissioner would contemplate with his board of governors that a quote unquote the excuse that this is quote unquote would be a more exciting approach assimilating their game. I don't know how many people who are Canadian football fans out there have ever complained that the game's not exciting enough. Um, Arguably, yes, it's true that NFL has a whole lot more money to spend in its players, to spend in various areas, but this has nothing to do with the excitement of the game. Um, Frequently, we as Canadians have seen that that the NFL has in fact regarded the Canadian game to be so exciting that it has in fact adopted and sought to change rules that are seem to be inspired by Canadian rules. For example, in the overtime, for example, the NFL for the longest time had the most dullest way to end a game. You have a tight game that's tied, and you go to overtime, and whoever has the ball first and scores, that's the end of the game. That is, in my view, has been a terrible way to end the game, and in the CFL, it's never been that simple. In the CFL, it is an extremely exciting game, and quite no surprise, the NFL had eventually, some years ago, relatively recently, changed its sudden death overtime to apparently more emulate the opportunity of another team to score without just ending the game in sudden death. So I think that we've seen over the years the NFL changing its rule. We've also seen that many Americans who have seen the Canadian game have regarded it to be a more exciting product than the NFL. So I think that, the CFL, thanks to its previous commissioner, Ambrosi, he has internationalized the Canadian game, internationalized interest. There's more and more players who are coming from various places as far away from Japan, Australia, different parts of Europe, even seems South America, Latin America. The Canadian game has been growing. People have become more exciting as, in terms of the Canadian game itself. So the need to, nobody's been complaining that I've never seen one person say that our game is boring and needs to be Americanized. And I've never seen how many people out there ever heard of, have ever contemplated, oh, we need to change our downs. We need to shorten the field. We need to change the field goal posts. All these things make the game more innovative. So what we see going on here is nothing short of in my view, a psychological operation. It's a part of a psychological operation by complicit operatives in the CFL who are seeking to capitulate to that mass psychological operation to conform and to assimilate one of many institutions that the Trump administration is seeking to assimilate to lessen the distinction between Canada and the United States. We as Canadians need to be vigilant beyond simply what's going on with the negotiation process with on trade. We need to be vigilant of how our society will be targets of various strategies of assimilating us, whether it be what we see happening in Alberta with this separatist movement that's happening, that is being courted and supported by various so-called MAGA interests. In my view, this type of trend of trying to disrupt Canada, to undermine Canada, to destabilize Canada. In my view, we see things going on. With respect to the separatist movement in Canada. All these, there's the attack against Canada is a multi-pronged attack, and we as Canadians should not think that our game as a national institutions are beyond reproach of these types of mass psychological operations, which are there to support this agenda. So we are left as Canadians into the view, we are at a stage basically that, okay, what can we do about this? Ironically, there's been a great petition that's collected thousands of signatures by an American who seems to be living in Texas. So that goes to show you that Americans, Texas is one of probably the greatest state of American football in the United States. They're playing high school football. They're playing this a very extremely high focused American football environment, and to have CFL fans down there goes to show you that our game is able to go right into the United States and create and inspire excitement by an environment where American football is more than accessible. So what will we do? What can we do about this situation? One approach has been by that American fan is to create a petition on change.org to get Canadians more aware and to lobby the CFL to think twice about its rule changes. In my view, that's going to, I hope that will have some impact, but in my view, that will have a limited impact. If what we see going at the CFL is part of a mass psychological operation whereby we see the Trump and his interests throwing money in various mass psychological operations to influence certain strategic institutions in Canada, in my view, a petition is going to have a limited impact in that regard, but hopefully will have some impact. The secondary approach that we have to the CFL and its innovations um, is to lobby, is to our politicians to protect the Canadian game and to by creating legislation among amateur sport in Canada to say that, okay, these are the rules of the Canadian game. Um, this is what we need to do to protect the Canadian game. These are the rules. So if we can create a Canadian Football Act where we consecrate and consolidate the rules of Canadian football, then and say that these are the rules that we need to have in order um, to play amateur sport in Canada, that is a strategic way of of uh, of affirming rules among Canadians that this is what amateurs. So the CFL can do whatever it wants in order to change its rules, which they have the control and the right to do so. But we as Canadians can control our game by creating an act to consecrate and to consolidate our um, Canadian game in our institutions uh, by protecting rules that are how they are played among colleges and universities. So if we can lobby the Secretary of Sport and Parliament, if we can lobby our politicians to to protect how the Canadian game is being played at universities and colleges and high schools. That is one way that we can send the message and protect our Canadian game as a national institution for Canadians, apart from what the CFL is doing. At the same time, I think that by protecting the Canadian football in that respect, that is going to be vital in terms of sending a message to the CFL that we as Canadians and through our political representatives do not agree with what is taking place at the CFL. And I think that would be an extremely important thing that we need to contemplate. So thanks for watching an edition of the Ottawa Market, and I look forward to your comments about how we can protect our Canadian game